if you would like to get started, thank you so very much.
Let's go for it, Carolyn. Welcome, everybody. My name is Brent Hoover. I am a business consultant for the SBDC here in Aiken, South Carolina. And today we are here to talk about a most interesting topic, business documentation, or as you can see from the title, the business paper trail. Now, we were requested to have this webinar for a multitude of reasons, but the primary one was obviously that people were dealing with COVID relief applications. They realized documents that they needed for said applications, they did not have. And people were scrambling, trying to scan last minute, consolidate everything they needed on a much of a crunch timeline. Therefore, we're hoping that this webinar will not only approach that, but a multitude of other factors as well. So what's the agenda? Well, naturally, we do have to talk about our services, who we are at SBDC, and what we can offer to you. And then we're going to get into the curriculum at hand today. As you can see, I've broken up these various documents into different categories: the legal startup nature, the financial and tax, the loan documents, the disaster, and we're also going to share you perhaps some best practices as regards to storing and maintaining these records. This may not be at the top of your to-do list as a business owner. However, when disaster strikes, and we know that Murphy's Law, anything that can go wrong will go wrong, we want you to be as best prepared as possible. So let's get started. Who we are at SBDC. Well, let's define our acronym for those who may not be aware. We are the Small Business Development Center. We are the SBDC related to South Carolina. What do? Well, we consult with for-profit businesses. As you can see here, we don't charge for those cases. Our confidential counseling is the core of our primary services. We want to make sure that that information remains completely between yourself and us as the consultants. Now, we also have access to valuable resources. Now, what does that entail? Well, that could be IBIS World for market research. It could be Profit Sense from actually determining forecasting. And of course, there are several other options that we've actually created here, that such as an Excel template for managing cash flow projections and or working cash flow in real time. Naturally, we have an education and training workshop. That's what we're doing. We're planning to continue this webinar format into the future this year. If you go onto our website, www.scsbdc.com, you'll see a great link for the training events. You're able to pull up the calendar and see what is being offered across the state. And lastly, we do offer specialty programs. So what does this entail? It could be something such as export, veteran focus, and our most recent cybersecurity. We started that back up in October. October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We are continuing that. Department of Defense is issuing the CMMC, that is the Cyber Maturity Model Certification, that's going to be needed for small businesses doing transactions with the government. Think of it as your basic cyber hygiene for level 1. That's what we're focusing on. So that is a new service that we're offering additionally. But overall, you get a very wide array of what services we can provide. So with that said, we're done talking about ourselves. Let's talk about actually what matters to you, the documentation at hand. So I told you I was going to start from the legal startup, because I'd rather you get these things in place from day one. Some of them are obviously required by law. Sometimes you just forget to keep some things around. We want to make sure we start from the basics and then work our way through the agenda. So as you can see here, we're going to start from the left and go to the right, no different than how we would read. So what do we have? We're starting off with the articles. Well, if you are an incorporated business or an LLC, you are going to have either the articles of organization or the articles of incorporation. Now, if you're operating as a sole proprietor or a general partnership, you don't register with the Secretary of State. So you are going to be simply doing local registration. For everybody else, you are going to have one or the other. Hence why we just call them the articles, okay? Now you're probably thinking to yourself, well, I registered the company, I don't need them. Well, actually, it's a good thing to keep on hand the articles of organization. That is literally everything you submitted to the Secretary of State. It's just brought back to you a copy that has Mark Heyman's seal on it, saying, yes, this is from the Secretary of State, it was registered, you're alive and in good standing. Now, someone such as a government contractor could need this for a certification with the SBA, or who knows, an application might actually want it to prove that you existed. Now, speaking of existence, let's go to number 2, your certificate. Certificate of existence. Remember, starting a business, it's like having a kid. The kid needs a birth certificate and a social security number. These two components fall under that. Some people don't even bother to have their certificate of existence. So yeah, whatever, okay? They send it to you via PDF form. And here's the good news. If you ever do forget and you lose your articles of organization, you lose your certificate, you can request a copy through the South Carolina Secretary of State. But we want to make sure that we always know where these documents are to start with. Clearly, I mentioned just like a kid, they need a social security number. In this case, they need the TIN. Now, people, here's one thing I see. They get the EIN number and then they get the actual IRS paperwork and they kind of disregard the actual paperwork that's coming in from the form of SS4 through the IRS. No, you want to hold on to actually the paperwork as well. Well, one, the bank needed it anyways to set up your business checking account. But two, if they requested for the actual paperwork and not just the number, you want to have it on hand. So please keep a copy of that at all times. Now, 4 is something the business may or may not have identified, and that's going on with your NAICS code. It's not a true documentation as such, okay? But it is identifying which code you're going to be operating with. One, your taxes are going to need it, because if you were operating, say, as an LLC with a Schedule C, they're going to have that code. Now, they don't call it the NAICS code. It's just a 6-digit code on the form, but that is still your NAICS. That's the industry classification system code. You can have many, you can have one, but every business has a primary NAICS for various reasons, whether that's dealing with government contracting, or perhaps when you were dealing with a relief application, they may request what NAICS are you in. Therefore, identifying it is important. You want a great resource here? www.naics.com. You can also use the census.gov. The reason I also like the naics.com, they give you an SIC code, and sometimes you may be asked for that. We normally don't deal with that too often, but that way you kind of knock out 2 birds with 1 stone, as the saying goes. But important, once again, not a true paperwork, but you need to know what NAICS codes that you are going to be falling under. These other elements you probably want to have in plan because you're A, identifying the roadmap for your business, but B, you may need it for a loan application, or perhaps it might actually become part of the technical specifications for government contracting down the road, and that's the business plan. So while not a formal document, again, hopefully you created one to begin the business with. That's what we actually offer as a service. We help people craft their business plans. For whatever reason, it's still a good thing to have from the start. And lastly, this one is important, and it's the agreement. So this may be called a multitude of different terms, depending on your structure. If you're a partnership, we call it a partnership agreement. If you're an LLC, it's called an operating agreement. And a step up from that, working with an attorney, if you're a corporation, you'll have your corporate bylaws. Essentially saying, this is who is involved in the company, this is how we operate, what we can and can't do, how we've settled disputes, how we theoretically kick somebody out, what happens if someone passes or wants to sell on, how do we bring somebody new in, etc. This is crucial for a multitude of reasons. The prior things I mentioned could be government contracting, could be actually working with a bank on an application, etc. They want to see who is actually in control of this company, what they can and cannot do. A lot of businesses tend to ignore these from day one. If you get these right from day one, you just know where they're being held, hold on to the paper, create copies of it, and you have the basic necessities for the various scenarios that we mentioned. Now, we're not done with the technical startup side, right? There's a few other things we should be considering that may be needed, say, for an application. Well, let's start with the first of the 2 that are in the steel blue, the business licenses and the business insurance, okay? Pretty much every business is going to have some form of license, unless they are registered maybe as a sole proprietor in a county that doesn't require it. Otherwise, you may have, say, here in Aiken, City of Aiken business license, City of Columbia, Town of Lexington, the list goes on. Business insurance, once again, do you have copies of your existing policies, whether that's general liability, whether that's workers' compensation insurance, whether you have a business owner's policy, the list goes on as well. Okay, pretty much most businesses are going to have 2 of those components. Now, the things in green may differ depending on the specifications of your business. The health insurance, well, that could mean either do you have insurance through your LLC as a single operator, or most likely the other scenario, you actually have employees and you're covering them under insurance. You know, if you're a business, you're working with your accountant, you always get that fun form as an employee called a 1095B. says, hey, your employer covered you, perhaps under Blue Cross Blue Shield or some other company. They covered you for these months. This is crucial not only from a tax element, but two, perhaps, if you're working for something that is actually covering relief aid for employees, okay? If that is part of the components, maybe something you're having reimbursed, it's going to be crucial showing here's the documentation as such. Now, the other two, once again, dependent. The PEO report. PEO would stand for Professional Employer Organization. So think about it, if you go through like a staffing company that handles all your HR, they handle all the withholding, and they give you your routine reports about, hey, you're paying us for this service, right? Well, here's what we're doing for said employees, walking them maybe through the I-9 process at the start, or most likely actually handling the payroll, right? Proper withholdings, etc. Hold on to those reports. They may be needed. The last element in South Carolina, you may not have to worry about. However, it's the minutes. So certain legal structures may require this, such as a corporation. Okay, here in South Carolina with an LLC, we're not having to worry about it too often. However, perhaps it's a business that's a veteran-owned business, 51%, 49 ownership. The veteran has 51. They want to document day-to-day and long-term strategic control. Certainly a way of doing that. That is an ongoing process, and it is good to have nonetheless. Even though it's not required, it's a good practice still to hold. Why? A, it keeps yourself accountable, and B, if someone ever needs it, say as a government agency, to maybe perhaps validate control the company, you have the documentation proving as such. So as I said, these three in the green may or may not apply, but the other two in the steel certainly will. So we've kind of really gone through the basics of the legal startup documents that we need to hold on to. Some are static, some are ongoing. Now, what about the financials? Once again, this could be just for your own purpose, but most likely you are going to use this to perhaps prove to a bank, or it could be needed, such as looking at the bank statements with the CARES grant that we helped clients go through on their first round of that. So what do we need? Well, let's start with the basics. P&L, profit and loss. I got my revenue, I got all my expenses. Here's what's left over. Now, they will have that in some shape or form, because when you're working with your taxes, say you're an LLC with a Schedule C, in essence, you're creating a P&L. The only difference is not every expense may be deductible and may not show up on there, but it follows that same process, right? The bank statements. Bank statements are important to reconcile your ledger. You want to make sure what the ledger and your bank statements match up. That's why we always encourage clients to do monthly reconciliation, but also too, let's say, God forbid, you lost some receipt accidentally. You don't have a backup. Bank statement says, okay, who you paid, or they paid you on said date. And a lot of times you may even be able to include a memo or a copy of that canceled check. That's why we're including those in blue. A good business always should know what's going on with the profit and loss, and they'll be sent their bank statements, whether that's a physical copy or a digital copy as well. Now, the ones in green, your company may have not produced. You may also notice a commonality among them: the cash flow, statement of cash flow, the income statement, the balance sheet. There's a reason in green, because we're going into the accrual basis accounting. Okay, those companies that are operating under that most likely are producing these three documents. Statement of cash flows, perhaps what's going on with the operating expenses. The income statement overall, following a very similar pattern to the P&L and the balance sheet. That's maybe something you're not familiar with: the assets, the liabilities, the equity. Now, for those business owners that are utilizing a program such as QuickBooks, the beauty of this is that you can produce these in real time with no effort, and you can go between cash and accrual basis accounting in a heartbeat. That is a benefit to having a program as such. But even if you don't, you can still work with a CPA or do it on your own, preparing at least the basis of what would fall into these cases. Because as I mentioned, the bank statements, we saw that was needed as additional documentation under the SC CARES grant. But let's say you're going for a loan. The balance sheet, it may be requested, and more than requested, it may be required in order to get said loan. So we like seeing those in place for business. Once again, these are not static. You're getting them routinely, right? The P&L is always changing because your business is hopefully making money and spending money to make money. The bank statements occur each month, and the cash flow, income, and the balance sheet, whether they're prepared annual for the tax purposes or they're produced in real time, say through a QuickBooks program or an Excel template. Therefore, they are up to speed. Now, what about the tax element? Because you heard me talk about the IRS through this or DOR. These are the common features that we see. Now I have schedule in quotations. There's a reason for that, because different forms of businesses have different tax forms. The obvious one would be what? The Schedule C for the LLC. You know, maybe you attach it to your 1040. But what if you're a corporation? Well, you're most likely dealing with a lovely form called 1120. What if you're a subchapter S, 1120S? What if you're a tax as a partnership, 1065? You know, theoretically, as an addendum to that, there's this K1 form. Whatever those forms are that you are always needed to apply or actually submit based on your legal structure would fall under the category of quotations schedule, okay? Just depending on your legal structure. And that could include also the addendum items. You know, you may have a depreciation sheet that's attached to it, etc. But in essence, that is your deductible P&L that's going to the IRS and or DOR. And what about the W-9? Some of you may not be familiar with it. Well, normally it's for contractors. The W-9 and 1099 tie in together. Say a contractor does work for you. You request a W-9 from them. It gives all their information and it gives a TIN number, taxpayer identification, either their EIN, hopefully, or theoretically a social security number. Now that's used to actually submit the information for 1099s. Because let's say you pay that contractor $1,000. Well, you're going to be most likely reporting that to the IRS saying, hey, I paid this contractor this much money, and you use the information provided on the W-9 to submit the 1099 to said contractor. But we also have seen W-9s needed for other reasons. I keep going back to say like the SC CARES grant. That was one of the elements they required was a W-9. This really could almost be in the legal startup, because I encourage my clients to print off a blank W-9 form, fill it out for their company, sign it digitally, save a copy in Adobe Acrobat, and always have it ready, because we're always talking about requesting it from somebody else. But in these cases, it was requested from you. Now the W-4 and the W-2 are for the employee side. Okay, we're not talking about contractors. There's always a little bit of confusion. I always hear people saying, well, I got employees. I'm like, do you actually have W and 2 employees? And they're like, no, they're actually 1099s. I'm like, well, you're getting into the contract element. But here they're the W-2. Okay, this is true employees going through the process, starting through the I-9, proper withholdings, etc. So they have their equivalent. Think of it as a W-4 equivalent for W-9. That's just saying the employer, you know this, you give your employers this form all the time. You know, it's saying, hey, here's how do you actually calculate the proper withholdings? The W-2 then says, okay, base excluding, withholdings, it'll show if you had paid insurance, retirement. Here is the taxable income that I paid to said employee within a tax year. This would be important, say if you were looking at, I don't know, maybe the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, and they want to show documentation. You requesting to use these funds to protect the employees and keep their jobs. Well, you have the W-2s on them. Now the 940s, I put in their own box because there's a couple of, there's 940, 941, 944. You're dealing with elements of employees, but figuring out, well, telling the IRS how much you paid, how much you withheld out of paychecks, and also too, how much you've contributed from the federal unemployment tax assistance, okay? But we found that these were the general tax documents that are going to be needed. Yes, there are others that are going to apply. Naturally, there's a form, for self-employment tax, etc. But these are probably crucial for applications, whether that's getting a loan or perhaps requesting government assistance. We've noticed the convergence of the data on these factors. Now, you heard me mention loans, so naturally we're going to discuss said loans. My asterisk on the bottom says checklist dependent, because with it, there are so many different types of loans that you can get. Each one has unique documents. However, once again, we look to see where were the common threads, and thus we ended up with this pie chart. So let's start with plans and work our way clockwise, right? The plans. We mentioned the business plan, but this also too could include the financial plan and a marketing plan. A lot of businesses probably will produce a financial plan sometime in their life, or in the life of their company, I should say. But the business plan and the marketing plan, once again, they are not static documents. They're ongoing. So people normally just do them for a loan. They're like, yeah, okay, I did it. I needed to. I got the money. Great. Well, once again, it's probably a good thing to be continuously updating, treating them as living documents. They evolve as your company evolves, right? Naturally, you're going to have projections. I don't know if any of you are familiar, but Colorado SBDC, I use a great tool from them. They actually have a quarterly business checklist for established companies. And we use them on quarterly reviews, and it has a multitude of factors, and it asks questions, and we grade the clients yes or no. And we identify based on the top areas of concern that we need to address before meeting again in the next quarter. Projections is always one. We always think of projections for the magic thing of 3 years. I need a business loan. I got to show 3 years into the future, or if an existing business, I got to show 1 year. Well, one of the questions on the Colorado checklist I always love says, are you continuously projecting sales based on historical data? Because there's this great tool in Excel that allows you to do it. And it's pretty good if you have a strong enough sample size of data. Sometimes you got to manually adjust, but that's aside from the point here. The primary topic I'm trying to address here is not only is it good for a loan, but it's a good thing to do ongoing, because once again, I told you, people may have been scrambling to have produced this documentation at the last second. Why scramble? If you're continuously doing it on a quarterly basis, doing sales projections, you've already got them, someone needs them, it's right there. Now, any loan, of course, needs collateral to secure, right? If you can't pay back the loan, they are going to get their money through some other source, in that case, some asset. Now, that's the standard philosophy. What I actually recommend a business is to do, once again, ongoing, identify what you theoretically could pledge as collateral. At any time, update it. Because that way you have a full inventory of assets that you'd be willing to pledge to fully secure said loan. But it's not just worrying at the last second. Because, you know, they think about it like, okay, I got to pledge this collateral, great, I got my loan once again. No, keep an ongoing list of it. Because that way you're not caught off guard. When the EIDL started, you know, they were telling people, hey, look, if it's over 25,000, we are going to take as much collateral to secure it as fully possible, right? On that case, you know, of course, they were saying to as much as possible for the business's particular needs. But once again, it would have been really good to know, hey, okay, I could pledge this asset, I could pledge that asset. Remember, banks do discount those, so you don't get the full value unless it's cash, but it's something good to keep track of. Now, I do have letters on here because a lot of us say SBA loans want letters of support or letters of contingent commitment. So that could be someone from the community saying, hey, this is a great idea, or it could be a vendor. I will do business with you. And it could be a customer saying, if you fund this business, I will do business with you X number of times per year for this price. Once again, hold on to those letters of support or contingent commitment. You never know when they may be needed. I mean, as long as you're updating the person who wrote it and saying, hey, you know, are you cool if we, you know, maybe use this, keep it in our back pocket if for some reason we didn't need it for this loan? Well, yeah, sure, great. Okay. Once again, it's a piece of leverage that you may need, whether immediate loan or also to have his back pocket. Credit history, knowing your current credit scores. All right. I understand we're talking about personal and business because banks do evaluate them differently, but it's good to know regardless, because this is just a purchase for a loan. Let's say in a disaster, you need an emergency line of credit. You've been around 2 years. You've been showing revenue generation. You can do it. Do you know what's going on with your credit score? You know, it may be evaluated as a factor into it. You know, with personal, do you know your current FICO score? With business, you have 3 different types of scores, but let's just look at one in particular, PAYDEX score through Dun & Bradstreet. Do you know if you're 80 or above there with your FICO? Do you know if you're 680 or higher? Once again, important things to know. The last 2 elements regard the resume and the PFS. PFS just stands for personal financial statement. That is what you will see across any different type of loan. They're evaluating you as an individual, looking also to see what's going on with other income that you could supplement in case your business is not making money, but also to what's going on with your debt to income ratio as a whole. Each bank is going to be supplying you with a template. You can find various ones online. They're really good just to run through, even if you don't get a business loan. I could almost stick them as their own separate thing because you're evaluating all your assets, your liabilities, etc. And you look at maybe at your typical operating expenses as an individual or a family household, perhaps. Now with the resume, certain loans want you to have an up-to-date resume in that industry stating, okay, here's how much experience you have, here's how much you've maybe worked with in past loans, etc. One addendum to this would be the equivalent of a capability statement. A contractor uses a capability statement as a resume, stating what NAICS codes they're going to operate under, what they've done in past performance, their key differentiators, etc. So that is something that is good to continuously update. Contractors do. As a business owner, even if you're not in contracting, maybe a wise idea. And as I reiterated here, the asterisk, everything's checklist dependent, but these are simply common elements. Otherwise, we might be here talking about an entire discussion on that. Things not only for just a loan, but continuously updating nonetheless. All right, you probably have realized that this has a COVID element, disaster strikes. So what are some things that are unique to recovering from said disasters? So my intern thought this was funny. I was kind of playing off of the idea of commercial property insurance, because when you're dealing with something like that, they normally put you into named perils versus open perils. And I thought this was appropriate for disasters because the named perils are, think of it as a drop-down list. The tornado, the hurricane, the flood, things we normally expect to happen, say in South Carolina. With those, we would know how to prepare for them a little bit better, but then something like COVID happens. You know, COVID would fall under that open peril. It's something, could be anything and everything. COVID was completely unexpected, caught us off guard. So businesses are a little familiar with doing the disaster relief through the, what I like to call the quote unquote named perils, right? But COVID opened up that quote unquote open perils. So what do we need to be looking through to have disaster protection? Well, I put together just a basic formula. So notice, we have the things that are in steel blue, we've already covered, the legal, the tax, the financial. Well, we did notice, say, through looking at COVID funds, SC CARES grant, PPP, EIDL, etc. We started adding on probably these other two elements, okay? The personal and the inventory. So we've covered legal, tax, and financial. What would fall under personal inventory? Personal is something we saw that particularly through, say, the SC CARES grant. Well, one of the things they wanted was a color copy ID of your driver's license or the equivalent, say, of a passport, right? And they wanted the social security number. Well, I hope to God you know your social security number. If not, please memorize as such. But a lot of people actually, they don't have color copies of the driver's license. Now understand that what's on your driver's license is considered PII, personally identifiable information. So you do want to protect that if you've got a digital copy, but that was one of the things they wanted, okay? Also too, you saw that the applications were requesting birth certificates as well. Now, if you notice, you probably have some of these things if you've gone through an I-9 process, because there's a similar parallel trajectory of establishing identity and eligibility, but those were things we saw specifically asked as well. Also too, knowing your accounting number and your routing number. Say with the EIDL grant advance, it went up to $10,000. When they went from the 3-hour application into about the 5-minute application, streamlined, it was asking for, hey, give me your accounting number, routing number. Like, well, I can probably look that up for 5 minutes, but still, knowing that, yes, protect this information nonetheless, but having it ready. I mean, I'm trying to ask every one of these businesses on the call that you actually create, whether that's a digital folder or a physical folder, and we'll talk about it, of a collage, of all these documents ready to go. That way, it just makes your life so much easier. Now, I mentioned inventory. So yes, inventory could be asked through the COVID relief funds, but more than likely, this is coming from what I like to put under those named perils, you know, the hurricane, right? So if you know the model has shown the trajectory, it's coming for your area, you're worried about something being destroyed, well, one of the things you probably are going to be working with in tandem with your insurance company is a before and after list. No different than a retail store. It takes inventory to see what's the current condition, what do we have on stock, etc. And that way you're able to compare afterwards. That's why I've got the asterisk, you know, insurance dependent. Because if you're talking to your insurance broker saying, hey, this hurricane's going to come through, I've got appropriate coverage, I want to make sure my stuff is properly documented, the current condition, you know, hopefully you have something of equivalent of a safe room, you know, where it's, say, above a floodplain line, but we end up with after, God forbid, based on our best efforts, you know, it's still damaged. we're able to show the before and after documentation. So hopefully we get a claim filed and actually processed on our behalf. But it's something that businesses should be taking care of. An addendum to this would be actually through EMD's registration with Emergency Management Division. We're actually part of the ESF 24 emergency support function through the state level, making sure in case of disasters, we're essentially treated as boots on the ground for businesses. And that's one of the things you can actually register with EMD in case of a disaster. We're talking like physical, that you can get back into your business on time. So they're probably going to be asking for some of these documents as well. They're going to want proof that you are actually registered, say, with the Secretary of State. So it's still a little element that I want to plug in this manner of disaster. Now, when we went through a lot of these disaster applications, they wanted proof of the following, whether it's receipts, invoices, pay stubs, leases, and yes, let's not forget about ledgers, all right? So with receipts, you talk to any good accountant, they're going to tell you, well, if you bought a piece of equipment, don't throw that receipt away, make a copy, okay? Same with invoices, keep record that, hey, this was paid, have a copy as well. With the leases, that may or may not be dependent. And sometimes you'll see that even as a government contractor, when you're going through the documentation required, they'll say, hey, show me proof of lease. Well, that's why you got to submit a thing called an LOE, a letter of explanation stating, I don't rent anything, therefore it doesn't apply. Pay stubs are important, especially if you're going through the PPP to protect your employees. Let's say you're going back to a second draw PPP. Well, you have the pay stubs, documenting as such. Keep them on record. They may be requested, okay? The ledger is the obvious one. Keeping that up to date. It always gives me maybe a little mini heart attack. Maybe that's a dramatization of it. But when someone tells me, I ask them, well, what do you do for a ledger? And they're like, well, I've got a giant notebook, or I print my bank statements and I throw it down in front of my account and hope to God they make sense of it. No, I want business owners being more proactive. Okay, whether that's operating through QuickBooks, Quickens, using an Excel spreadsheet. And that is something that actually another benefit if you're working with the Aiken Area SBDC. I put together, no cost to my clients, a good working ledger that produces real-time working cash flow on the business and helps prep for taxes with your CPA. That way, making their life easier and your life easier, and hopefully your budget a little more friendly. So whatever form that ledger takes, keeping track of it. Some people, when you're like, well, I'm old school, I want to actually have something in front of me with an actual ledger. Great. Just also have a digital copy as well, and that's a perfectly acceptable manner. But we have seen that sometimes that either a government or a bank might want documentation to validate your claims. And in those cases, we want you holding on to these documents, keeping them up to speed in real time. And one of the great benefits too of QuickBooks, like with the receipts, you're worried, gosh, I may lose it. Well, they have the capability to do a link to your phone, say if it's a piece of equipment, they'll send that link, take a picture through it, and then upload the documentation, say said receipt, into their server, say you're working with QuickBooks Online. Great tool, you're already paying for it anyways, so you might as well take advantage of the additional value. Now we mentioned storages, right? So we should be talking about best practices. I like to treat this as a pyramid. Pyramid starts at the base, we work our way up to the top. The originals, hold on to the original documentation, whether that's the original IRS paperwork that you've received, or it's an original receipt, say of a large piece of equipment or machinery that you've purchased. I really recommend, and this is something I've been talking about for years to my clients, using an old school notebook. You get these sleeves and you can stick everything in, and keeping track of a chronological order of a lot of these pieces of receipts and or documentation. That's the starting point, having the originals. Say, we're always considering disaster. Well, let's just talk about even if the IRS wants to audit you. Well, do you have proof of the original receipts? It's going to be key in your favor should that audit happen. Well, two, let's then talk about the next level, the digital copy. Whether that's using something through the QuickBooks manner, or that's you taking a picture on your phone and putting them in a thumb drive, keeping a backup copy as well. Now, that's you, as you mentioned earlier, we have specialty programs, right? Cybersecurity, we do want to take care of that. So that is my addendum to this point. But lastly, we go up to my third level, and that's deposit. So this could take two forms. whether that's a fireproof safe in your business's quote unquote safe room, or that's a safety deposit box with the bank. And yes, your business can get one. I mean, you get one probably most likely for yourself. You know, either that's an original or it's a thumb drive or both that you throw in there so it's fully protected in case of one of those quote unquote named perils occur. We want people to take good care of that. And as I was mentioning with the ledger, that's just a good start on a digital level. Use something like the notebook with sleeves for the originals. And once again, whether it's fireproof safe, safety deposit box, or if someone else is willing, you know, like say your CPA, you know, maybe for a little fee, hey, we'll store some originals as well. Whatever method it takes, take good care of those. And that brings us to the conclusion of said webinar. We've gone through the basics of the legal startups, we worked our way through the loans, documents required. We've worked also through the taxes and or working financials, and lastly into disasters with best practices. So I would be kind of stupid if I did not supply my contact information. So here it is. You got my phone number, you got my email. Email is the easiest way to get in touch with me. Right now, due to COVID, we are working on a completely virtual basis. So if you call my office number, which is here, it'll just say, hey, we're working virtual, please contact me via USCA. That is the best way to get in touch with me. We'll get you signed up as a client. That is one thing we do require at SBDC. Our services are no cost, but the SBA holds us accountable based on metrics and what we're doing with clients. So therefore, we do have to have you sign up. It'll take you 5 minutes. I'll be happy to walk you through it. Now, please understand, I'm just here in Aiken. We have SBDCs all around the state, okay, and all the different counties. Therefore, if you are, say, in Rock Hill, well, we do have a Rock Hill SBDC. I mean, you're happy to call me, but I'm most likely going to say, well, if you're talking about local elements there, you probably should go talk to the Rock Hill team, okay? So once again, it's not just here in Aiken, we're across the state. Please take advantage of your local resources. They're going to be a benefit, and it does not cost you anything. So with that said, let's actually open up to some of the questions. It looks like we have quite a few in the chat. Let's get started here.
And Brent, I was just going to remind everyone,
Sure.
please to enter your name in the chat box to confirm your attendance if you have not done so already. Also, we will be sending a post-event survey at the conclusion of the presentation. And so those that respond to the post-event survey will be sending out the presentation slides probably by Monday afternoon. So that will give everyone an opportunity over the weekend to reply to the post-event survey. So Brent, if you can see the questions, I'll let you take it away.
Right now, it looks like there's only two. There's one requesting a copy of the ledger and requesting a copy of projection template. Yeah, we'd be happy to provide that. You know, normally that's something we offer, you know, exclusive to our clients, but even if you're in a different area, say you're working with, you know, the Charleston SBDC, et cetera, no, we'd be happy to provide that. So once again, feel free to send me an email. Like I said, we don't work with just clients from the start. We like to work routinely. So that's an added benefit of being a client of the SBDC, something I would be happy to help you with.
And Brent, if you would like to, I can, Brittany and I can send out those two items when we send out the presentation slides.
Sure, certainly. I mean, the one thing we want to stress is documentation. You don't want to wait to the last second. I was hearing some stories from some of our other consultants, and they had clients, unfortunately, in these situations. And they spent countless hours just getting everything up to speed in a digital format. COVID has required us to pivot, and we want you to not have to deal with that headache. We want it to be a seamless process. Whenever something arises, you can ask for it. You got it ready. And once again, you can focus on just running your business. So whether it's COVID related or just normal day-to-day transactions, these are crucial. Because once again, we found out 2020 and 2021 are proof that Murphy's Law is always in action. Therefore, I want to put you in the best position possible as a business owner.
So Brent, we had a consultant here in the Charleston area that coined the phrase of the box of hope.
The box of hope, I like that.
So we had many people that would come in wanting to apply for the EIDL or talk about the PPP loan and why they may have been denied, or
Yeah.
the quantity that they were approved of. And so we coined that shoebox that people have that they put receipts and documents in as the box of hope. So we've started using that quite often. So many of those that have the box of hope need to really pay attention to this wonderful presentation that Brent provided us today.
Thank you. And once again, feel free to, even if you don't want to sign up as a client, just have a random question, you know, believe me, I'm not going to say ignore you, please. I'd be happy to assist as we go along. So with that said, you know, if there are no other questions, I'm going to check once again in the chat, but let's see. LaShonda, thank you very much for the kind words. I greatly appreciate it. You got my contact information. Please reach out to your local SBDCs. And when that's said, stay safe, be prepared, and have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brent. You have a great day as well.
Thanks, Carolyn.